Gulliver's Travels, Part 2, Chapter 6. Gulliver shows his skill at music and answers the king's questions about England. He doesn't make you have to use too much inference about what the chapter's about, does he, when he gives you a chapter title? The king, who delighted in music, had frequent concerts at court, to which I was sometimes carried, but the noise was so great that I could hardly make out the tunes. I am confident that all the drums and trumpets of a royal army beating and sounding together right at your ears could not equal it. I would have my box moved from places near where the performer sat, as far as I could, then shut the door and windows and draw the curtains, after which I found their music not unpleasant. I had learned in my youth to play a little on the piano. Glumdalclitch kept one in her room, and a master came twice a week to teach her. I call it a piano because it looked like that instrument and was played in the same way. A notion came to my head that I would entertain the king and queen with an English tune on this instrument. But this appeared extremely difficult. The piano was 60 feet long, and each key was a foot wide. With my arms outstretched, I could not reach more than 5 keys, and to press them down took a good smart stroke with my fist, which would be too much work. A method, I thought, was this. I prepared 2 clubs and covered the thicker ends with pieces of a mouse's skin so that they would not damage the keys or make noise. In front of the piano, a bench was placed about 4 feet below the keys, and I was put on it. I ran along it that way and this as fast as I could, banging the proper keys with my clubs, and managed to play a jig to the satisfaction of both their majesties. So he's taking a club and he's kind of running up and down a bench to hit the keys of a piano to play a song. It was the most violent exercise I ever did. I bet it was exhausting. Yet I could not strike more than 16 keys or play the bass, which was a great disadvantage to my performance. The king would often order that I be brought to a table in his room. He would command me to bring a chair out of my box and then sit, which brought me almost to a level with his face. In this manner, I had several conversations with him. One day I took the freedom to tell His Majesty that the power of reason is not equal to the size of the body. Among animals, bees and ants have reputations for being more hard-working, skillful, and wise than many larger animals, and, as small as he took me to be, I still hoped to do His Majesty some important service. The king listened to me with attention and began to have a better opinion of me. He asked me to tell him about the government of England so that he could learn of things he might also do. Sounds like a pretty good conversation. He's trying to let the king know that just because he's little doesn't mean that he's not important, and that he is smart, he's intelligent, and he can help out in some way. He needs to have a purpose. And the king, who has never listened to him before and has always laughed at him, and he's been very narrow-minded, in that narrow-minded meaning he can't really see out his own opinions, and thinking that Gulliver could possibly come from a country or a government as good as his. I wish I had the tongue of Cicero to celebrate my dear country in the style it deserves. I dwelt on our soil and climate. I spoke about our parliament and the education of our nobles to be advisers to the king and champions, ready to defend him. I told of our bishops who took care of religion and who are the spiritual fathers of the people. I described our courts and judges, wise men, and who decide the rights of men, punish wickedness, and protect the innocent. I mentioned the management of our treasury and the bravery of our forces on land and sea. I did not forget our sports or anything that was to the honor of my country, and I finished with a brief history of England in the last 100 years. This conversation continued over 5 meetings, which each several hours long, and the king heard all with attention. When I was at an end, His Majesty, looking over his notes, raised any doubts and questions. He asked what qualifications were necessary to be a noble and whether they were free from bribes. He asked how much time he spent judging between right and wrong at what costs. He asked about our taxes and noting many wars if we were quarrelsome or lived among very bad neighbors. He was amazed to hear that we, as free people, have an army during times of peace, which is true, even us. During times of peace, we have armies. He said our history was only a heap of conspiracies, murders, and massacres, the worst that that greed, hatred, envy, and cruelty could make. Then, taking me in his hand and stroking me gently, he said these words which I shall never forget. My little friend Grildrig, remember that's what they call him, Grildrig, by what I have gathered from your story and the answers I have wrung from you, I conclude your people are the most evil pests that nature could ever let crawl on the surface of the earth. So he's getting this because Gulliver is talking about wars, and he's talking about how his government works, where there's a king and a queen and the nobles, kind of like the lords that we've talked about. And this king, he's only heard the negative, and he's taking it as just because of all of those negative things that all of the people of Gulliver's world are evil. And are there evil people? Absolutely. And maybe some even in Gulliver's government. And history does have a lot of wars, not always really super pretty, but that doesn't mean that everybody in Gulliver's world or our world are evil. It was pointless for me to reset these words. I was forced to rest with patience while my noble and beloved country was so injured. But great allowance must be given to the king who lives entirely cut off from the rest of the world and is unfamiliar with the customs of other nations. So he's kind of forgiving the king because of his narrow-mindedness. Narrow-mindedness being that the king can't see anything outside his kingdom, literally, but he also only has the views of what he knows, and he's not going to really see anything outside what he already knows. He's not going to listen. Lack of knowledge always causes many prejudices and narrow thinking, narrow-mindedness. It would be hard indeed if such a king's notions of right and wrong were held up as a standard for mankind. To show the results of a limited education, I shall tell what happened when I made a proposal to His Majesty that was greatly to his advantage. In hopes of getting his favor, I told him of the invention and use of a gunpowder. A proper quantity of this powder, I said, rammed into a hollow tube of brass or iron, can drive a ball of lead with such violence and speed that nothing can withstand its force. The largest balls can destroy whole ranks of an army at once, batter the strongest walls to the ground, sink ships with 1,000 men in them to the bottom of the sea, and if joined together with chains, can cut through masts, slice hundreds of bodies through the middle, and lay waste to everything in front of them. I told him we often put this powder inside large iron balls, and then fired the balls into cities we were attacking, ripping up pavement, tearing houses to pieces, and throwing metal splinters into all who were near. So he's talking about back in Gulliver's day, bullets were little pebbles, they were like little balls, and they would not shoot out of a gun without gunpowder. And so he's trying to get the king to learn of this so that perhaps they could invent their own type of gun with gunpowder. I said I knew how to make gunpowder cheaply and cannons and shells, and could show his workmen he would have the power to batter down a town in a few hours if it refused one of his commands. I humbly offered this knowledge to His Majesty. The king was horrified at the description in the proposal I made. He was amazed at the helpless, groveling insect, that was his phrase, such as I could think such inhumane ideas and appear unmoved at the scenes of blood and ruin I painted. So he can't even see with the reason for needing guns. His country and his government runs in a way that just does not need any type of violence, apparently. He said an evil genius, an enemy of mankind, must have first made such machines. As for myself, though few things delighted him more than a discovery in art or nature, he said he would rather lose half his kingdom than know such a secret. He commanded me, as I valued my life, never to mention it any more. This is a strange result of narrow principles and short views, meaning narrow-mindedness. This king, who possessed every quality that wins admiration, love, and respect, who was wise and well-educated, who was adored by his people, let slip from his hands the power to be the absolute master of their lives, liberties, and fortunes. Is that a bad thing? Think about that. He has absolute power already. Does he need to instill fear? Does he need to use force to make people follow him? Gulliver thinks so, but his king doesn't seem to need it so far. I do not say this to speak ill of the excellent king. His flaw arose from ignorance, from not seeing politics as a science, as do the more brilliant men in Europe. I remember very well one day with the king when I happened to say that in England we have 1,000 books on the art of government. It gave him a bad opinion of us. He said he hated all secrecy and treachery in the prince or minister. He said the knowledge of governing amounted to common sense and reason, to justice and mercy, and to speedy judgments in the law courts. His opinion was that whoever could make 2 ears of corn or 2 blades of grass grow on the same spot where only one had grown before did more for his country than all the politicians put together. So this is a good thought. He's saying that just because a king is a king doesn't mean that he's any more important than the small farmer. The farmer who can do more. He believes that the power and the importance of a government is actually on the workers of the country, the farmers, the average person that does for his country. It's not the power of his country is not because of the king. It's because of the people, and it's a very interesting way of thinking. I kind of like his way of thinking. The learning of his people is very lacking. They know only morality, history, poetry, and mathematics, although it must be admitted in these they excel. But mathematics is applied only to what is useful in life, such as improving farming or manufacturing. No laws in their country can have more words than there are letters in their alphabet, which amount to 2 and 20. Indeed, few of them are even that long. They are expressed in the most plain and simple terms, so there is only one meaning. That would be nice if every law just had one meaning and they were really easy to understand. That's not the case with laws today. They have had the art of printing, just like the Chinese, for a very long time, but their libraries are not very large. The King's, which is the largest, has no more than 1,000 volumes. I was at liberty to borrow books as I pleased. The Queen's carpenter made a kind of wooden ladder 20 feet high, each step of which was 50 feet wide. It was a movable set of chairs. The book I wanted to read was put up leaning against the wall. I climbed to the top step of the ladder, faced the book, and walked to the right about 8 or 10 paces, depending on the length of the lines. And so I descended gradually until I got to the bottom of the page, and then I started over again. I could easily turn a page with both hands, for they were as thick and stiff as cardboard. Their style of writing is clear and smooth. They avoid unnecessary words and use expressions. I read many of their books, especially in history and morality. I was very taken with a little old book which always lay in Glumdalclitch's bedroom and belonged to her governess, a serious elderly woman who preferred to read about spiritual matters. The book deals with the weakness of humankind and is generally read only by women and common people. They boast of their army, if it can be called that. It is made up of tradesmen from cities and farmers from the country whose commanders are nobles and chosen by ballot. I have often seen the militia of Lorbruggrug exercise in a field near the city. A cavalier on a steed might be 90 feet high. I have seen this cavalry draw their swords at once and wave them in the air. Nothing is so grand, so surprising, and so astonishing. It looked as if 10,000 lightning flashes were darting from the sky. I was curious to know how this king, whose lands cannot be reached from any other country, came to think of armies. I was told and learned from reading their histories that over the ages they have been troubled by the same disease to which we are subject. The nobles seek power, the people seek liberty, the kings seek absolute rule, and civil wars result. So it's not people that are attacking this country, that they have to have an army for. It's an army for civil wars, people rising up against the kings and the nobles that are maybe making bad choices, or maybe being greedy and wanting everything for themselves. So that is the end of our chapter for today.